It's no easy feat for a franchise to stick around for over a quarter century, but yet again, with this latest installment in the Resident Evil franchise, Capcom have proved they are the kings of survival horror. After the quite lean Resident Evil 3 remake, all eyes are on Capcom to prove that they still had a substantial game in them.
Quit your whining, we're almost there.
But thankfully, Ethan's 4 years later is a much more satisfying and meatier package. Since they first debuted in the trailers, Lady Dimitrescu and her daughters have taken the internet by storm, dominating the conversation around the 8th major title, but when it comes to Village, they're just the tip of the iceberg. Being stepped on is only the beginning. And don't worry, this is a spoiler-free review. Many were disappointed when Resident Evil jumped from third to first person, with the 7th entry in the franchise, but somehow Village makes that previous game look like a beta. Everything has been expanded upon here, and the controls feel more responsive and fluid. Whereas Resident Evil 7 feels like a test case, Village is a full-blown first-person experience, scarpering through the titular village in the opening hours. Wouldn't feel as desperate or dangerous if it was in third person. It feels confined and unfamiliar, so quickly the player will go from rummaging around looking for supplies to making a nerve-wracking last stand. The scares are intensified with such a small field of view. Not only that, but every nook and cranny is dripping with detail in this game, at least on PS5 anyway. Village is by far the best looking game Capcom have committed to code, but you can't go into detail about the perspective without going into combat, and that's where this game truly shines. The faceless protagonist Ethan is back, and this time he's here to fight. In Resident Evil Village, players will be engaging in a lot more combat, but don't worry, this certainly isn't an RE6 situation. Combined with the PlayStation DualSense, this is the most fluid feeling Resident Evil game we've ever had. Sony's new controller has been realised to full effect here, and really goes a long way to making Village feel like a next-gen title. Every weapon feels unique, and this controller gives them purpose. Firing a shotgun in this, for example, has a real punch to it. Every attack is felt, and this just completes the experience. Capcom have set the bar when it comes to the use of the haptic controls. That combined with the resistance triggers, it's all just presented enough to notice, but without getting in the way like certain other games. Sniper headshots are also surprisingly achievable to pull off in the heat of battle, and unlike any other game ever, mines are actually useful in this, which really helps mix up the gameplay in Village. It does have to be said though, that after a few hours, the knife doesn't really have much effect. It just feels a bit useless, and I feel sorry for those people going for knife-only runs in this one. You're gonna be in for some pain here. Another aspect in where Resident Evil Village excels is the performances. The entire run of Resident Evil games has never really been about the emotional impact. Sure, there might have been a sister looking for a brother, but now the story has some real punch. It's quite surprising for a Resident Evil game. The campy nature is still here, but only really shows its head when the villains are about. When it comes down to it, this is quite a serious story, and this time Ethan isn't so much of a blank slate. As throughout the runtime, the player will really come to connect with him. The voice actor Todd Soley really sells Ethan's struggles here, and makes him feel more human than ever. But surprisingly, the combination between camp and hard-hitting story revelations don't really clash. They mix together in a way that just somehow works, and that's because none of the performances here let the side down. The player might have just been through a hellish ordeal, but then the mood is suddenly lightened again, thanks to the Duke or the Twisted Heisenberg. This is also the best Chris has ever been. He now feels like the true franchise lead that it was meant to be back in the earlier games. Each time he and Ethan meet is some of the best acting Resident Evil has ever had.
This is just too much.
For 16 years, Resident Evil 4 has been the benchmark for many games in the series to the top, but straight up, this game feels like playing a revamped Resident Evil 4, but in first person. From the colourful cast of characters to the swath of environments, Capcom has really gone all out here. Without giving anything away, the early hours of Village are terrifying, and a real test for those who don't want any punches pulled. Castle Dimitrescu then offers up a totally different style of play, thanks in part to a certain tall lady being hot on Ethan's tail, and then later on, gameplay and ways to progress are shifted once again. Each of the 4 lords of the area are more than just a foe to overcome, and they really make this one of the most diverse Resident Evil games to date. This really feels like Capcom going all the way back to their greatest hits, and rolling them all up into one package. Even the beloved inventory system is back, and organising items in that thing is a game in itself. Something also has to be said about the big man, the Duke. This game's merchant is more than just the laughing hooded figure, and he's always in the right place at the right time, offering up not only goods but excellently written dialogue. Each and every time Ethan meets him, it's a welcomed encounter. Proper exploration has never really been done in a Resident Evil game before. In fact, the areas have always been pretty small. Sure, Resident Evil 4 felt big at the time, but there was only really a few houses per area and maybe a cow to kill. The closest comparison here outside Resident Evil would probably be The Evil Within 2, but even then Village blows that away. Any worries that survival horror fans had before will be swept away in the first few hours. The scares and the atmosphere are still here, and nothing's watered down. Thankfully, Resident Evil hasn't been turned into every other AAA game. Trekking through the village is chilling at any point. Not only will the enemies be hiding around every corner, this is the most vertical Resident Evil game in the franchise. And it really does pay off to watch out for Lycans on the roofs, just waiting to attack. And the Lycans are like no other Resident Evil enemy we've ever had. They're somehow cautious, clever, and aggressive at the same time, and seriously wipe the floor with them molded from Resident Evil 7. They're more of a threat than zombies in Resident Evil 2 and 3, and somehow more tactical than Ganados from Resident Evil 4. And there's the more standard shambling RE enemy here as well, but these little goblin fellows don't offer much challenge, and they're really a bullet sponge. The tried and trusted map system is also back, the one first revamped from Resident Evil 2 Remake, letting players know that areas are clear and where treasure might be, locked doors, and where certain animals reside. And this is all vital to getting new upgrades, as the Duke's always going to be willing to buy treasure and make some food for Ethan. Speaking of the Duke, a great deal of the enjoyment in this game is going to be meeting him, no matter where he might pop up. Capcom really know what they were doing with this one, bringing a beloved mechanic back from the 4th installment. The big man even references the old merchant, upgrading weapons in video games is old hat now. It's all rather soulless and just feels like watching those numbers go up. This certainly isn't the case in Village. The Duke is funny, welcoming, and there's a layer of mystique to him. But after every purchase and upgrade, he provides flavor text and never really repeats himself. If you want the full Duke experience, just bring him food for some of the recipes that help you with health and block upgrades. He'll be sure to lick his lips. Worth it for that, really.
Till next we meet.
And speaking of those lips, they're gloriously rendered in the RE engine. In the AAA space for the most part, games have looked phenomenal for a while now, and after Capcom moved on from the MT Framework engine, you could easily argue that the RE engine holds up with the best of them. 4 or so games later, Capcom have come out swinging with Village. The game's a real graphical showpiece. When the village is coated by snow, you can hear every part crunch underneath Ethan's feet. Then in Castle Dimitrescu, the rooms are welcoming and warm. There are some swampy areas that feel and look disgusting, and so much more on offer here that I can't talk about yet. Winds will whistle through the trees, leaving us uncertain if they're being stalked or not. Combine that with the ambient sounds of the castle chambers, and the fear of this game will utterly consume you at times. Though it does have to be said that this game doesn't really feel too hard. Now this might come from decades of experience with the series. For sure some of the earlier combat sections feel overwhelming and do get your heart pounding. But after a while, you're rolling in ammo and health items. Sometimes it feels like all Ethan has to do is just check a few drawers and he's set. The Lycans will be the enemies that players have to contend with the most, and offer the most challenge, but at least midway through the game, you can sort of work out how they function. And if you're not being overwhelmed by the numbers, you can take real advantage of this. And then later into the game, there will be some larger enemies to deal with. These can just be simply cheesed. Now this might only be a slight down towards the game, but if you're up for a real challenge, I suggest jumping into hardcore straight away. Finding faults in Village is no easy task. By now, if you haven't realised, this is one of, if not the best Resident Evil game to date. And in a world where so many AAA games launch broken or with bugs, this game's a real standout. Though one thing that has to be pointed out is that this game peaks too early, and it's quite difficult to get into specifics right now. But what I will say is Village has one of the best sequences in Resident Evil history, and opens up damn strong. This is one of the more mysterious entries in the franchise, and some of the payoffs are just well worth the wait. But along the way, there are just some parts that bring this game down slightly, if not just ever so slightly. But all in all, this is the future of Resident Evil. Now before anyone gets too excited, that doesn't mean Resident Evil must stay in first person forever. I think down the line, if we have a combination of first and third person, it's gonna work perfectly. But from the story to enemy design, this game delivers from the start all the way to the end, pretty much. We just don't get too many big budget horror games, and Capcom is really using the brand of Resident Evil to experiment here, whilst not alienating fans all the way back from 1996. That is something to be applauded. This game is an example of sequels done right. So many times Capcom could just go back to the well, but they don't. And yes, this game does have DNA that links back to the past ones, and it utilizes traits that we've all had before, but they've all got a unique twist here. There is a merchant, but he's much more different and more of a character now. And yes, Lady Dimitrescu is an evolution of Mr. X and Nemesis, but with a totally new coat of paint and character. The devs over at Capcom know what they're doing, and with the recent run of Resident Evil games, the franchise has never been in a better place. And so that's my review of Resident Evil Village. And with this one, I can't score it any less than a 4.5 out of 5. I can't stress enough how this latest Resident Evil game delivers, and I can't wait to see what's next. And even more so, I can't wait for the world to get their hands on it in just a few days. So until then, don't forget to like and share and subscribe. I've been Ben Roy Turner, and there's going to be much more Resident Evil content coming soon, but for now, no more games.